Hello, and great to have you all on this fantastic session. I think this is going to be one of the best sessions at the GRC Summit because we are talking about the intersection of three very important components in technology. One is artificial intelligence, the other is cloud, and most importantly for this audience, risk and compliance technologies, what we call as GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. My name is Vidya Falke. I am the Chief Technology Evangelist here at MetricStream. I have built risk technologies and platform and so on and so forth. But what is really exciting for me is the really amazing set of panelists that I have on this call. Ronnie Look, he is from Danske Bank. He's head of data analytics and systems group over there. Stuart Frost, he's the head of enterprise security and risk management at Departments of Works and Pension in UK. And last, Rani Urbas from Cloud Trust from Google Cloud. So we are really put together a set of people and thought leaders who can really bring cross section of insights of their thoughts on how this world is shaping as we start coming out of this post-pandemic normal, if you will. So as we know, right, as pandemic over the last year and a half to 2 years has really accelerated digitization for everyone, enterprises, consumers, and across the entire planet. And what that digitization has really done is really created immense opportunities for us to really rethink how we really do risk management going forward. Prior to this summit and session, we have been having conversations with our prospects and customers, and all of them are thinking, right, we have done risk management, compliance, GRC, if you will, in a certain way over the last year and, in fact, decades. But now going forward, really need to think about how we can really leverage natural language processing, right? In fact, this session that we are recording, as we all know, this is going to get recorded, transcribed, and people can really look at insights out of even this conversation without even being present at this conversation, right? And we all are doing this Zoom and Teams and WebEx recordings and sessions across the entire last 2 years, and will continue to do that, right? So you can think about how you can really leverage all these digital assets going forward, and technology has really reached that point where you can start looking for insights, looking and pulling and prodding for what has been the word, what is the nuance of certain thing that was said in a conversation. So this is really exciting time to really rethink, reshape GRC, if you will. And we are not alone, right? Other software spaces, other technologies, they're also thinking of, how to reimagine the way business has been going on, work has been going on. So that's, I wanted to keep that backdrop because that's really exciting for me. And I will let each of our speakers introduce themselves a little bit more and give us the high level perspective of where they think this intersection is going to play out and what are they excited about going forward. Let's start with you, Ronnie. Ronnie from Danske Bank, please.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting times, especially with the cloud options. So I think it's also important to separate the artificial intelligence and the cloud part, even though that the cloud, of course, offer several possibilities. But especially with having more rapid rollout of a GRC platform, I think the cloud plays a pivotal role in that part, being able to faster scale the solution. And it's definitely something that here at Danske we are really looking into to how we can get to the cloud and leverage the cloud options that is being offered for our GRC platform. When it comes to the AI, definitely something that is, I think, in this space is not that mature, and definitely something that we're looking into and have built some solutions that are leveraging natural language programming, and and we are looking into further options, especially also gaining more insight from a lot of the data that we have, which is a lot of the GRC data is text. So a lot of the text mining that needs to be done, that is where we see some really potential benefit of it. And and further also with rolling out and embedding AI and machine learning into to the GRC platform will of course help improving the data quality from the end users, and having a better solution in the end, and being better able to scale that solution.
Look, thank you for that intro. Let me switch gears to Rani Urbas. From your experience with large customers, right, who have business critical systems in the cloud, and you guys know everything about it at scale. Uh, what are your thoughts on AI and machine learning to enable governance and compliance really at scale, and for the broader good?
Yeah, thank you, Vidya. And also, I'll use the opportunity to also do a quick introduction. So, I work at Google Cloud, as Vidya had mentioned, heading up the enterprise trust team. So, I'm part of a global team of senior compliance, privacy, and trust professionals. And we work directly with global, highly regulated customers to ensure that we're meeting their compliance, their regulatory, and their privacy requirements. So, on that journey, we provide guidance and transparency on trust related topics, and we support our customers as they work with their regulators. And prior to that, I've been in the software high tech industry for over 25 years, different technology companies living and working in Asia, Europe, and in the US. And now, specifically, Vidya, to your question, um, for all organizations, but especially the largest ones, where scale is always top of mind, so much of what we do revolves around the adherence to a set of rules or policies. Now, how does an organization perform compared to their compliance and their policy requirements is really what we test for. But there are really two ways that I believe, two very perhaps not as well mentioned ways that AI ML, where we can incorporate AI/ML into our GRC practice to really be a better partner to our business units throughout our organization. So, way number one, ML is essentially going to start with data sets and a series of rules that are prefed to the system, and it's going to identify new users and behaviors. Now, this is key because it can help the team identify new and emerging trends in adhering to policies even before they escalate or become an issue or a crisis. Because when it's an issue in crisis mode, there are fewer options available to us as GRC professionals, and the result of any action that we take often is restrictive. Now, the predictive intelligence of AI/ML changes that paradigm. We can say that we observe the following types of user behaviors, and now we can be proactive, propose changes to existing policies. Perhaps it requires more rigor and we end up implementing different controls, but we're doing this in the context of enabling our users to achieve their business goals using AI/ML. So, the continuous monitoring really allows us to be thoughtful, and the way the model learns through usage and through data and user trends is kind of the term that I'm using, really allows us to become better at our profession and better at supporting our users. The second area where I see AI/ML is also excellent is for identifying anomalous behavior. So right now, when there are compliance violations, our systems are designed to block those. It's rule based, that's the easy part. But there's a whole host of things that our business partners may want to do, which are not even technically against our policies, but we don't have very much flexibility in our current rule based systems or applications to allow it, or perhaps even fully track it to see what other actions happen after that. So again, I want to just say that I'm not talking about internet security threats. That's a whole other separate ball of wax, and but I think we can all agree that the majority of breaches are due to human error. What I'm talking about is user behavior patterns that may not have been anticipated, but largely still within the realm of acceptable use. And this is an area that takes up a lot of our time because of the analysis we have to do to validate this. So, because AI/ML looks at all of the use cases, the massive amounts of data as more organizations move to the cloud, and we have a data deluge to work with. Now, these usage patterns can be more easily identified, and it can be used in multiple ways to improve our controls, provide us with more insight to becoming better partners to our business community. It also can very clearly demonstrate that we are not about just adherence to rules, but really vested in understanding how our users and our organizations are using technology, and how we implement best practices GRC that's deeply aligned with the needs of our users. So those are two areas that I see AI/ML really being used at scale, Vidya, with what most of our large customers are doing in their organizations.
Thank you, Rani. I think that's pretty insightful, the two-step way of thinking about it. And interestingly, that dovetails with an intro from Stuart as well, because he and I were talking earlier to get to this level of scale and understanding and leverage of these technologies, there is a role of what we call as maturity, right, of an organization, of the way of doing things. And Stuart, you had some very interesting thought process around it. So if you can introduce yourself as well as elaborate on the need for a maturity of an organization before you even start embarking on such journeys.
Hello, everybody, and thanks very much for that, and thanks to my colleagues for their insights there. I think before you get down to using machine learning and AI, and even a GRC platform, you've got to be in a position to use it. I've found to my own experience that if you're not in a position to use it, you can't maximize the power of the data. You can't integrate the data, and maturity levels and capability levels play a huge part in this. And for me, there's some fundamentals before we even get to GRC, and that's to get your board's endorsement to it. Without it, it will be an uphill struggle. They set the tone. They're accountable. You've got to have them on the board from the outset, the board on board. I found that not everybody understood GRC and the philosophy of GRC and why it came about. And if you understand it, you're more likely to get buy-in. Why are we doing? And ultimately, how will it support business delivery? What's the vision? Articulate the why. That vision then lays the destination out, which guides our strategy. And don't do it in chimneys. The whole concept of GRC and AI to maximize the data is bringing it all together, so it's integrated with each area to deliver outcomes. And you got to have that software solution to aggregate the data, to aggregate that decision making. You get that picture then, but maturity is absolutely key. And maturity, by that I mean the measure of an organization's preparedness to meet its risk. If it's low, you're not going to be able to maximize the power of the data. So you might have a solution. You might want to use the AI, the machine learning. But if you're not in a position to use it, you won't be able to use it because it won't be understood and it won't be maximized. And I would wrap all that with some governance. For me, that's the most important element of the GRC triad. If you get your governance right, everything else will follow suit. And I would add one thing before I pause. I would move on from GRC and put assurance into it, because you find that people comply, but comply in the wrong way or with the wrong thing. And the assurance will find that out. And again, you can use artificial intelligence to link different data objects to help you find that out. So let me just pause.
That's an amazing insight about assurance and maturity. And Ronnie, we were talking about some interesting examples, right? You had mentioned some PII related situations. If you can elaborate that, I thought that was an interesting example to bring in the point about maturity, yes, at abstract level we understand it, but connected to a precise example, we can, perhaps have better clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think both Rami and Stuart brought up some very good points, and especially Stuart about the maturity. So I think what we experience here in Danske is that there's, of course, a big buy-in to get this right with the GRC platform. It goes across the whole bank, across all three lines of defense, and but we are moving from some system and some areas where there's less maturity and some area has more maturity. And for some of those areas, we needed to understand the data. We have a lot of legacy also across the bank. So being able to dig into a rather large data set and understand those data set, we came across to understand the what PII data did we have in those data set, and then we got some smart people together and developed an algorithm to spot the PII data, both using basic technique as pattern search, regular expression, but also applying NLP to spot names and so forth within the text, which is a bit more tricky. But that has helped tremendously in spotting some of the problems that we have in our data set and correcting those data set, as well as we have seen many other use cases for it. So one of the new use cases where we're using the algorithm is to, in real time or near real time, run through some messages and then spot those messages for PII data as they're getting created. So using it as a preventive measure for not having a potential data breach down the road. And I think that's just one angle of it. So we can both use it reactive, but we can also start using that proactive to prevent risk from materializing.
Yeah, and I think as you rightly pointed earlier, also, right, all of you, that there is enough intelligence, uh, enough amount of data and text now available that you can start connecting the dots. Uh, so there is enough power available so that business can start leveraging it. Of course, assuming that the level of maturity that is expected is there. But Rani, you had made some good points earlier when we had talked that you have to figure out how to deal with regulators, especially when you start using AI-based technologies, right? Because we see all these headlines, right? I mean, simple example, somebody's loan getting denied because the bot told not to give out the loan, right? So how do companies kind of keep this 360 picture on dealing with regulators, especially when you start using some of these cutting edge technologies?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Working with regulators is part and parcel of all of our jobs. And personally, working in the IT industry for many years, I've come to really appreciate the constructive tension and partnership between industry and regulators to maintain the right levels of protection without inhibiting commerce, right? That's what they're aiming to do. So we need innovation, and I firmly believe that we need regulatory protections. We need both. Um, and very similar to what Ronnie had said. Data governance is so important. You know, as I call the cleanliness of your data set. How good is your data to begin with is really key. And I'll talk about how regulations too come into this. So for the most part, the regulations on AI/ML are evolving, and they'll continue to for several more years, I've no doubt. Um, but I want to draw an example of the recent European Commission, came out with some recommendations. They called it the Harmonized Rules for Artificial Intelligence. It was basically an AI Act. And I want to draw some verbiage from it because I want to give everybody the feeling for what is it that they're trying to accomplish. And I think it really goes back again to what Stuart said in terms of governance and assurance, and what Ronnie said about data, the cleanliness of your data and the integrity of your data. So that the act actually says that the expectation is, and I quote, appropriate data governance and management practices. And it goes to say that it must use data sets that are accurate, relevant, representative, free of errors, and complete. And then it goes on to stipulate that high risk AI systems must be sufficiently transparent to enable users to understand and control, keyword control, how the high risk AI systems produces this output. So this expectation of transparency and accuracy of data and free of errors, complete, representative is not new for any of us, right? In listening into this call in the GRC field, validation, precision, independent and neutral review of processes and systems is something that we are deeply familiar with. But in order to better support our business partners, we need to ask the right questions of your IT departments and your technology partners. So if the decision is to go with AI and ML data sets, probe into all aspects of your ML data sets, features, and algorithms. And regulators understand that businesses are moving to adopt this technology. It's here, it's happening. So, like Stuart said, you've got to have the right level of maturity and the right mindset, the paradigm within your organization to adopt it. But when you adopt it, what the European Commission paper actually said, again, I quote, is their proposal, this act, represents a balanced and proportionate horizontal regulatory approach to AI that is limited to the minimum necessary requirements. And then it stresses the key message without unduly constraining or hindering technology development or otherwise disproportionately increasing the cost of placing AI solutions on the market. So it's clear that the regulators understand that this technology is here and it's here to stay. And what they're trying to do is to work with all of us in this room to figure out how best to protect our constituents, right? I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's the analysis that I took away from it. So yeah, back over to you, Vidya.
Yeah, so I think, Stuart, would you like to add to that, especially as in this post-pandemic world, businesses are looking to do things differently, right? How does frontline and get engaged in the business of risk? What do you see as the things that are shaping going forward?
I find this interesting because we're talking about AI and machine learning, yet 90% of breaches today are still down to human error. And organisations still to this day don't work towards minimum standards. It's actually quite frightening. We're talking about governance, and the first recorded governance failure was in the 14th century with the Medici Bank. Here we are 7 centuries later, arguably not having learned lessons, still seeing great governance failures on a global perspective. So I repeat what I said earlier. From a risk perspective, I can really see the advantages of AI, but you've got to have the capability and the maturity to operate it. For example, some simple examples for me. My discipline is really security and the integration of security. Machine learning won't get tired. So if you're operating a 24/7 eyes-on glass monitoring system, it can automate your log analysis for you for 24/7. You can keep on top of your trends. Again, from a security perspective, wouldn't it be great to move from that traditional signature detection approach to identifying malware? It's not always up to date. There's quite often a time lag. Can we get to one that interprets events, learns from various sources about what's safe and what's not, and allows you to keep on top of the protection and to control events? That then should then feed your risk picture to get a more accurate risk picture, so you've got real-time risk assessments. You can reduce that attack window. We can analyze usage patterns. We can analyze those patterns of behavior, identify them, and turn them into KRIs. So we can always be on top of stuff. And if we link it all together, ultimately that can lead to all sorts of potential for an organization to manage their risks. But again, I come down to back to that human point. That's all well and good, but you've got to have the right culture, the right accountability, and the right management on your risk approach to be able to take advantages of what today is being offered in terms of AI and machine learning. Get everything in place to take advantage of it. And there is so much potential if we do, but let's get the basics in place first.
You're absolutely right, right? I mean, we can keep reducing the risk window and keep minimizing it using these technologies, but ultimately, if the accountability and essentially governance is not in its place,
Yeah,
keep seeing the same things year over year and decades over decades,
and,
and to your point,
and
centuries over centuries.
And if I may, you started up at the top of the session to talk about cloud, and I don't think anybody watching needs me to talk about the virtues of cloud, its scalability, its ease of access, etc., etc. But cloud still equates to data on a server in a building somewhere in the world. So,
Yeah.
so you're bringing in integration. You're bringing in the very concept of GRC. You've got to bring in cyber, physical, personnel, information, IT. And you've got to integrate them all and mature your processes, even with cloud. Even with cloud, you've got to mature your process because it's still down to humans somewhere.
Yes, absolutely right. Yeah. So I think
I
this
think
has been a fascinating and interesting conversation.
yeah.
I've taken quite a few takeaways. Um, yes, we have to think about governance and maturity. There is a lot more available now to leverage natural language processing, robotics process automation, AI, so on and so forth, to start getting insights and foresights out of your data, working in tandem with your regulators. But we need to be very cohesive and methodical around the way we go forward. So before we close out, I would like to, just go through this panelists, and if they wanted to just give a single one takeaway for the audience, what would that be? And perhaps we start with you, Stuart, and then we'll wrap it up.
My one takeaway would be to get the basics in approach, such as risk appetite, accountability, and culture. If you can get those in place and start to increase the maturity of the organization, you are in a much better place to take advantage of what we're being offered today and what's available to us in machine learning and AI. And we do need to be in the place to take advantage of it, because certainly in security, those trying to attack it will most certainly also be taking advantage of it.
Yeah, very valid. Ronnie?
Um, so, my best advice is not to be intimidated by AIML. And I sort of see a lot of folks, just because it's new and it's different. And, you just don't have to be a data scientist to really learn to understand how it works and how to govern it and perhaps even how to leverage it. And we all need to be strong partners to our business unit leaders. And they're starting to think about, after the advent of cloud, they have the data. They're thinking about, perhaps if not quite investing in it, they're already thinking about how they're going to use ML, to improve their businesses. So, a couple of takeaways. One, to start, I think that, as GRC professionals, we need to have a really good understanding of cloud-based solutions, risk governance, and cybersecurity, very similar to what both Ronnie and Stuart have said, and security architecture. You need to have a good understanding of the high level principles of ML models. There are supervised and unsupervised. So, good understanding of it. AI/ML is a costly investment for most companies. And a lot of companies that we work for perhaps are not going to make that investment this year, but perhaps next year or the year after. I think all the more reason that it requires a neutral perspective from the start and throughout each part of the thinking about it, the planning, the developing, and perhaps the implementation process in the future. Now, some of the questions that as GRC professionals we could be thinking about is simple questions. Is the sample data set, high integrity, representative of the underlying reality? And if you take it one step further, is the distribution, which may be rightfully based on today's reality, the appropriate one to use? Be on the ground level when these decisions are being, or perhaps when these plans are being discussed in your organization. I think it's really important for us to have a seat at that table. It's also a learning process for all of us. No one is an expert at this. So partnering early with your IT departments and business users can really make a difference. But my parting thought video on this is my belief that if AI/ML is done right, the algorithms can be more transparent than human decision making. And I think Stuart touched on this, right? It has the potential to make important strides in reducing discrimination, in engendering equity. And however, I think to make that all a reality, we need to evaluate the use of these models. And ultimately, we're going to be responsible for auditing it and how they're being used. We need continuous monitoring of real outcomes against expected outcomes, coupled with meaningful regulations. And I think we have successfully adopted systems of governance and auditing, to help ensure that our business reflects societal value. And we should continue to do that when AI and ML comes into our organizations too. Back to you, Vidya.
Thank you. And just closing thoughts from you, Ronnie?
Yeah, I think it's, as Rani also pointed out, not being afraid of it, but I think it's also some part is more mature. So when you talk about chatbots, which is a bit more mature technology now and being implemented in many places, there you don't have to have the big insight and it's more mature. You can easily get that set up. But when we talk about the GRC itself with a lot of the text, and Stuart also pointed out about that we get that right and get some of the data properly correct. I think deriving insight from that is a bit more tricky. It's not that mature, and we also know that from various areas like ORX, for example, are also pinpointing some of those challenges with the information about getting insight from all your past events, for example, so you can understand that patterns that occurs in the companies and lift that up so you can take a risk-based approach to say, what are we trying to prevent going forward? One of the key takeaways is simply, understand the problem that you're trying to solve and focus on that. I've seen too many times that you hire a lot of data scientists and you don't have the right focus on the use cases, and you invest a lot of time and a lot of effort in getting really nowhere. So having a real strong focus and focusing on your use cases is really key in this area of AI ML.
Okay, thank you so much. Fascinating conversation indeed. Thank you, Ronnie, and Stuart. And thanks from Metric Stream as well for being part of this exciting panel. With that, the attendees, please have a great rest of the conference. And till next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.